Alright, so we are back on the Hyundai Santa Fe with the 2-liter. We're going to be going over the Evap system this week. And to start it out, I'm just going to go over some locations of certain components. So right here we have the purge solenoid control valve. Right here, this is going back into the intake manifold. And then this is what goes all the way back to your gas tank. If you follow this line, you'll see it goes down there. Okay, so if you look right here, this is our fuel tank. I know it's a little hard to see. Oh my. There we go. This is our fuel tank, and this line, this big line, is what actually goes up to where you fill up your gas. And then if you look right above here, you have your canister close valve. And then the actual canister is located above the gas tank, which unfortunately you can't get to without dropping the tank. All right, so let's talk about everything that we just saw. So starting out, we had our purge control solenoid valve, and we saw the lines that went to the engine, which went into the intake manifold. And then on the other side, we got it going to the canister. All right, so talking about the actual canister, the canister is what holds your activated charcoal. And then we saw the canister close valve, which goes to the fuel tank air filter. And then another line going straight to the fuel tank. And then with the fuel tank, obviously you have your fuel pump, and that goes to the fuel and rail injectors. It has a two-way cutoff valve right here, and this is the ORVR valve, and ORVR stands for Onboard Refueling Vapor Recovery System, which is where this is actually getting the vapors from and then going into the canister, going through the purge control solenoid valve and into the intake manifold. And then also in the video, we saw our fuel refilling. So this is the fuel cap, right? And then it goes all the way down, and this is where we saw it going into the fuel tank. And then obviously this whole thing is your fuel tank, and you also have your fuel tank pressure sensor. All right, so let's talk about how everything works. So we saw a canister, right, which we talked about was filled with your activated cartridge. All right, so now let's talk about how everything works. So we have our canister, which we saw, and as I mentioned, it is what is filled with your activated charcoal, which absorbs your fuel vapors and actually cleans them, and then it can be redistributed back into the intake manifold by the ECM, because the ECM controls the purge control solenoid valve, which is what actually allows these vapors to flow back into the intake manifold. And when it wants to, it will ground the purge control solenoid valve in order to actually open it. Next, we have our gas cap. Obviously, we know what that is. Our fuel tank pressure sensor is what is actually monitoring the pressure in the fuel tank. Surprise. And this is actually super important because it checks for the operation of the purge control solenoid valve by monitoring the pressure and vacuum level in the tank during the operating cycles of the purge control solenoid valve. Next, we saw our canister close valve, which goes with the canister. So the canister close valve is what actually closes off the connection between the gas cap and our fuel tank because it comes from the canister, and this actually prevents the vapors from escaping into the atmosphere. All right, so the whole purpose of your evap system is basically this monitoring system. So what it's trying to monitor is the pressure inside the actual fuel tank, because when your car is running, your gas or your fuel, when it heats up, is actually producing these vapors, and these vapors can cause an increase in pressure.
and it tries to keep a happy medium of this pressure while operating to ensure that you're getting proper fuel delivery. So it does this by controlling its vacuum via opening the purge control solenoid valve or closing it, and that will cause the pressure to increase in the system, and you want to make sure that that stays in a good range, and it can do this by duty cycling the purge control solenoid valve. So once your car has been running for a little bit, the OBD2 system checks to see if there's enough vapors uh, vapors for it to start monitoring. So once it can see that there's enough, it will either allow the vapors to go back into the intake manifold with the use of the purge control solenoid valve, or it will close it, obviously, again, as I said, to maintain a certain pressure and vacuum level. And then it also closes it when it wants to check for any leakage of the system. Okay, so as we were talking about, as your vehicle is running, the vapors in the fuel tank will continue to build a pressure, and in order to get that down, you open the purge control solenoid valve. However, if it can't be lowered, then the system thinks that either your gas cap is open or you have a very large vacuum leak. You might have noticed maybe if you've left your gas cap open before, it will tell you to go check and make sure that that's closed. It's because of this system. In order to check for leaks, as we talked about, it just closes the purge control solenoid valve and waits for the pressure to build up, and it measures that pressure in the certain amount of time that it was closed. So this is what we were talking about, right? The monitoring system. This is just a picture of everything it's doing in a short amount of time to ensure that there's no leaks and make sure that your system is operating properly. I'm not going to go through this all. If you want to pause the video, you're welcome to, and you can go through this yourself. Alright, so I back probed into the purge control solenoid valve, and I'm just going to be checking for resistance. And if we look at my multimeter here, I got a reading of 20.4 ohms, but if we look at the spec, the specification is for 22 to 26 ohms, which means that this is slightly out of spec. Okay, so looking at our wiring diagram here, we have our purge control solenoid valve. It's a 2-wire sensor, which we just back probed to test the resistance of. So that pink wire is actually getting power from the fuse box, and the black wire is what is actually grounded by the PCM in order to control your purge solenoid valve. Another thing we have right here is our canister close valve, which we talked about, that prevents the vapors from going back into the atmosphere, and it's right on the gas tank. Alright, looking at our wire diagram again, we have our 5-volt supply right here, and that's actually going to go all the way down here to our fuel tank pressure sensor. It is a 3-wire sensor, and you have a signal wire as well as the ground. Alright, so I started the vehicle to check for the Evap system vapor pressure, and as you can see, it's cycling between 32 and 49 Pascal, and the reason this is measured in Pascal is because the pressure in this system is extremely low. For reference, 1 psi is 6,894 pascals, so it's very minuscule. Alright, I'm gonna hold it at a cruising RPM and see if it changes them. So as I start doing this, you can see that the fuel vapors actually, the pressure kind of goes all over the place, right? You can see it goes into the negatives, and it will actually stay there until I eventually let off the gas and it returns to normal.